Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Welcome to another fine Yankee Air Museum historic presentation night. I'm Jeff Bush, again, your host. I want to welcome everybody aboard tonight. How many first-timers are here tonight? Oh, cool. So that's pretty much assume that you're not members.
No, we're members too.
First time in a minute?
Yep.
Wow, okay. How many non-members do we have? Becca, take names.
Get their email.
We'll get you. For those in attendance who are not members, this event is free for members. They don't have to pay the $10 that it takes to get you folks in here. But even though it is free, we do ask members to donate at the end of the evening. We ask members for $5 donations so we can keep these fine programs coming and keep speakers coming in from all over the country. As far as upcoming events, this weekend, Saturday, we have Wings and Wheels at our new Roush Aeronautics Center. In combination with that, we have our Bombers, Berries, and Brews tasting fundraiser. These events start at 2 o'clock and run until 7. June 24th, you'll see the return of the ever-popular cold storage tour. This lets you get up close and personal to some of the aircraft we have over in the bomber plant in storage. Plus, the 25th annual Thunder Over Michigan will be August 12th and 13th. As always, check the website, www.yankeeairmuseum.org, and watch for updates and information on any upcoming events. Yes, sir.
If you want to volunteer for Thunder Over Michigan, you can contact me. Unfortunately, the garbage guns, all the positions are full. So we can't do garbage. Sorry. We have positions available for the A team and for the flag.
Thanks, sir. An unsolicited comment. And now we would like to ask you to turn your phones either off, silent, or stun. And tonight we'll have questions at the end of the program. Following the end of World War II, there continued to be aircraft built at the Willow Run bomber plant, though it was not the B-24. It was, in fact, the Fairchild C119. It was built in 1951 by the automobile company Kaiser. Our speaker tonight will be presenting on the unique mission of these aircraft, their conversion to AC119 gunships, and their service in Southeast Asia. Join me now in welcoming our very own museum docent, author, and historian, Barry Levine.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I realize the highways are a challenge here in Southeast Michigan, so I appreciate the effort to come here. I'd like to welcome you all to this presentation about Fairchild AC119 gunships in the Vietnam War. It's a remarkable, if little-known story. My name is Barry Levine. I've been a volunteer here at Yankee since 2015. Been a shameless self-promotion. I've written 2 books, one about the museum itself and a short story collection about Michigan aviation, both on sale in the gift shop and on Amazon. As a side note, I've submitted this AC119 story to Vietnam Magazine. Publication date is unknown. As a side note, I've got interest in C119s when I learned that some of them, as Jeff mentioned, were built right here at Willow Run at Kaiser Fraser in the early 50s. And then one thing led to another about these remarkable aircraft and the airmen that flew them, particularly in Vietnam. Thanks are owed to many. My family for their support, Carol, Dan, and Jessica. The Yankee Air Museum for hosting me. It's a valuable education about aviation history every time I'm here. I'd like to call out Becca Folsom for her support in organizing and coordinating these events. The AC119 Gunship Association and their members were a huge help, and they have a first-rate website, which you can see up there. They also published this book, Stingers and Shadows. I recommend it to anybody who's interested in a first-person account of what it was like in Southeast Asia in the late 60s and early 70s in the Air Force. Great. It's really, really excellently done. Recommend it to anybody. I'd also like to mention the late Wendell Cosner, who was a C-119 pilot and historian. He wrote a comprehensive history of these aircraft, which was another great resource. I'm honored to have several AC119 Association members here tonight, as well as an AC130 vet. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves at the conclusion of the presentation, and then maybe say a few words on their perspective on their service on these aircraft. And I'm sure these guys will correct me if I get something wrong during the presentation. Tonight will not be a review of how we conducted the Vietnam War. What I will focus on is the aircraft, their missions and crews, as commemorated by this marker at Dayton at the Air Force Museum, was dedicated in 2017 at an AC-119 reunion. The Air Force converted over 50 C-119 transports to gunships during the Vietnam War. The acronym AC stands for Attack Cargo. These aircraft were known as Shadows or Stingers, depending on their configuration. To most people, AC-119s don't have an immediate association with Vietnam like the Huey helicopter or B-52 Stratofortress, but they saved countless U.S. and South Vietnamese lives during the war while slowing down communist aggression. The Air Force called them fixed-wing gunships. Somewhat informally, a navigator wrote that the aircraft resembled a black and green Hostess Twinkie with wings. Others called 119s thousands of rivets flying in loose formation, where the Buck 19 is a wordplay on its designation. The enemy saw it differently. The North Vietnamese general noted in 1989, U.S. gunships were the aircraft most feared by our troops. They called them Dark Death. Other aircraft came in, made a quick strike, and were gone. The gunships lingered over the battlefield, and when they sighted a target, the deadly cannons released sustained destruction such as our ground troops had never seen. One of the pilots was a man named Don Fraker. He said 1 2-minute orbit by an AC-119 could cover every square inch of an area the size of a football field with gunfire. And Fraker was well aware of the human toll that it took, which weighed heavily on him. The roots of Shadows and Stingers go back to Sherman Fairchild. He was born in 1896 and founded over 70 companies, including Fairchild Aircraft, which made significant contributions to aviation and aerial photography. He was a 1979 inductee into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Among many other aircraft, Fairchild Aviation built the C-82 Packet, designed to replace pre-World War II transport aircraft such as the Douglas C-47. The next generation of the C-82 was redesigned with bigger engines. The cockpit was moved forwards in the nose. First flown in 1947, became the C-119 flying boxcar. You can see one trundling out of the hangar, the old Kaiser Frazer, previously Willow Run, and then Hydermatic plant. There was no evidence that I could find that anybody thought these freight haulers would become armed combat aircraft over Southeast Asia, but that's exactly what happened. Over 1,100 C-19s were built, including 71 here at Kaiser Frazer. 1953, the Air Force canceled that contract. They said there were cost overruns, and there was some back and forth between Kaiser Frazer, and I suspect the full story is really lost to history. At least 8 of the Kaiser Frazer aircraft were configured for Vietnam service based on a review of serials number provided by that historian Wendell Cosner. In the popular culture, both aircraft appeared in film. C-82s were in the 1965 Flight of the Phoenix with Jimmy Stewart, you can see on the right. In 2004, there was a remake with Dennis Quaid, which used a C-119. It was an Elson Trevor novel. It was a survival film after an aircraft crash in the desert, and the survivors cobbled together something that could fly. In addition to traditional air cargo roles, C-119s had many unique assignments. They dropped prefabricated bridge components, which weighed almost 2,500 pounds each, to assist Marines finding their way out of North Korea's Chosan Reservoir in November 1950. It was essential to the Marine survival and avoiding annihilation by the Chinese. In Southeast Asia, civil air transport, by the obvious acronym CAT, was a CIA operation. CAT took C-119s, repainted them in French Air Force livery, and flew them with U.S. pilots. Dropped supplies and French paratroopers at the Dien Phu in 1954. 2 of those pilots, James McGovern and Wallace Buford, Buford's on the left, McGovern's on the right, were shot down and killed, becoming 2 of the first Americans to die in Vietnam, in what became the Vietnam War. Their names are not on the Vietnam Wall, as that name records casualties from 1959 forward. McGovern and Buford were posthumously awarded the French Legion of Honor by President Jacques Chirac in 2005. Boxcars were part of our 1950s and 60s espionage efforts against the Soviet Union and China. In one example, in Project Corona, C-119s and then C-130s retrieved capsules dropped by a satellite from outer space with photos of Soviet and Chinese military installations. So it's an intelligence treasure trove for the United States. And the retrieval process was this Rube Goldberg setup where they used ropes and wires and hooks to catch a capsule descending midair at about 10,000 foot altitude. Capsules falling at 1,600 feet per minute. You can see here's the capsule, here's the parachute, here's the hook going back to the C-119. So it's this kind of cockamamie setup to retrieve this high value intelligence information. One of the first retrieval aircraft that successfully did it is now at Dayton at the Air Force Museum. 119 ferried U.S. troops to Florida for a potential invasion of Cuba in October 1962 in response to the missile crisis. The B-52 commander of McCoy Air Force Base in Florida recalled waves of C-119 aircraft loaded with paratroopers landing for the potential Cuban invasion. And presumably, they would have then flown on to downtown Havana with their load of paratroopers. Had that happened, we would not be here tonight. Independent of C-119 development, the concept of fixed-wing gunships emerged. Lieutenant Fred Nelson, he's the guy on the right, unsuccessfully promoted side-firing machine guns from aircraft in the 1920s. 20 years later, in the 40s, Lieutenant Colonel Gilmore McDonald revived the idea of the same lack of interest from the military. And the theory was an aircraft flying in a level turn around a point in the ground as if tethered to a pylon could deliver accurate firepower from guns firing perpendicular to the line of flight. Two key figures in the story were Captain Ron Terry and Lieutenant Edwin Sasaki. Terry was an Air Force pilot. He inspected all aspects of air operations in Vietnam as part of an Air Force Systems Command team. Sasaki flew 36 missions on C-47s, designing and evaluating gunships. He had earlier in his career worked on Gemini 4 technology for NASA. He's the guy in the center on the right. This is later in his career at Cal State, or one of the schools out in California. The Viet Cong were regularly attacking U.S. Special Forces outposts and Vietnamese hamlets at night to avoid air counterattacks. U.S. flare ships could effectively illuminate the areas surrounding the hamlets, thus protecting against night assaults. Water break. That led to Terry Sasaki briefing Air Force General Curtis LeMay, who was then Air Force Chief of Staff, about gunships. LeMay approved further tests in Vietnam, and the staff was just about unanimously opposed to the idea. They didn't want any part of it. LeMay pressed ahead. Curtis LeMay was a man never afraid of unconventional thinking. And Terry Sasaki thus became a handful of people in military history who both helped create a new weapon system and then tested in combat. As it turned out, the Air Force used 4 variants of the gunship concept in Vietnam. Gunship 1 was the AC-47. It's a variant of Hairless Joe, the museum C-47, in turn based on the civilian Douglas DC-3. It was known as Spooky or Puff the Magic Dragon. It served well, and some were lost in enemy action, but we needed aircraft that could carry more firepower. Gunship 3 was the Spectre, the AC-130 based on Lockheed's civilian C-130. The military issue was adopted as a gunship. These are still in use by the Air Force. While they're effective, there were many demands for C-130s elsewhere. So between the aging AC-47s and the high demand for AC-130s, there was a need for an additional gunship, setting the stage for AC-119s. And it just so happened that C-119s were readily available in storage and reserve units. Not much wanted elsewhere. They were a 20-year-old airframe, and they were getting long in the tooth, but they had one more job. Recycling C-119s was approved by Secretary of the Air Force Harold Brown. Brown had a PhD in physics and from Columbia at age 21. Most assuredly, I had no such academic accomplishment on my resume. He later served as President Carter's Secretary of Defense. Air Force leadership in Southeast Asia originally wanted no part of the C-119s. It would yet be a logistics issue to support another type of aircraft, And the C119s, truth be told, had a reputation for mechanical problems such as landing gear and engine mount failures. However, their high wing configuration and a clear line of sight across the fuselage was a big selling point. And you can see for yourself some of the key specs. So Secretary Brown awards Fairchild-Hiller a contract to modify 26 aircraft to AC119Gs by adding 4 7.62 millimeter Gatling guns, and then further modifications for the Ks, including adding 2 20 millimeter cannon and 2 jet-assisted engines boosting thrust and carrying capacity. Once modified, the planes were flown over from the U.S. to Vietnam on a very long, multiple-stop trip and began arriving in country December '68. The AC-9s were getting prepared for their work in Vietnam. Here's where we were with the war effort. The Tet Offensive in January 1968 was a turning point in reduced public support for the war. It was a U.S. military victory, but was not portrayed as such here at home. U.S. troop presence peaked at about 543,000 men and women in April '69, and then an overall drawdown begins. President Nixon announces the Vietnamization of the war in November 1969. The idea was to give South Vietnam a chance at independence from the North. While saving South Vietnam may not have been high on the priority list of our airmen, they did a superb job at a constant risk of being killed, wounded, or captured. First group over to Vietnam was the 71st Tactical Airlift Squadron, a reserve unit from Columbus, Indiana. They were activated in May 1968. The 71st was one of the best prepared and trained C-119 units, so these guys got the call. The training was held at Lockburn Air Force Base outside of Columbus, Ohio, in the summer and fall of '68. One reservist was this man here, James Alvis. He recalled joining the reserves in 1964, and he had little interest in going to Vietnam. He worked aircraft maintenance, and the word got out that his guard unit was being called up. He recalled, in his words, panic and disbelief setting in. The Gs of the 71st began arriving in Vietnam in December '68 and were known as Shadows. The first combat mission was flown in January '69. The pilot was Lieutenant Colonel Harold Mitchell. He flew the first Corona mission that successfully retrieved the photo capsule midair in 1960. He was flying bombers in World War II, so this man had a great, great Air Force career. In June of '69, the 71st returned to the U.S., leaving some of its G models and 2/3 of its personnel in Vietnam to fill a new squadron designated the 17th SOS. Sergeant Floyd Deaton, shown returning home to Indiana. His son here in the bottom left doesn't look too thrilled to see the old man. Yeah, right. And here are the unit logos for the 3 different groups that were over there in Vietnam. Just to give you an example of the workload that these guys carry, the Gs flew 3,700 sorties in 1969 alone, 14,000 combat hours, 35 million rounds of ammo expended, no friendly outposts overrun when covered by these aircraft. Even though the war was supposed to be winding down, it sure didn't seem that way. They flew day and night in close air support, troops in contact situation where our guys were fighting Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese Army. And they typically used every drop of fuel on board to load as possible to support our guys before going back to base. Flew armed reconnaissance and the interdiction of hostile areas and infiltration routes, search and rescue, medevac missions, night armed escort for road and offshore convoys, illumination for night fighter strikes. To my knowledge, and from what I understand from the gunship guys, there were no missions targeting North Vietnam, but they were very active over Laos and Cambodia. And this is what the pylon concept looks like in action. So it's aircraft flying in a circle, and they're firing the guns at a target at a constant circle. So you can see on the right, for example, the orbit of the airplane, and the gunfires coming straight down. You do not want to be on the receiving end from this firepower.
Every 5th round was a tracer too.
So you can see it.
Yeah.
President Nixon authorized a secret bombing and air missions over Cambodia in March of '69, as you can see, bottom left of the graphic. That required fake flight plans and mission reports showing that the attacks were actually occurring in South Vietnam, where in reality they were over Cambodia. Whatever the location, ground forces appreciated the work of AC119s. In one instance, a Special Forces commander on the ground, when advised of F-4 Phantoms coming to assist, shouted into his radio, "Screw the F-4s, get me a shadow." This is a graphic of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, essential supply route used by the North. Passed through countryside that was mountains, triple canopy, jungle, grassland, everything. It was a constant U.S. target. Stingers with their more sophisticated electronics were put to work. In one estimate, there were 5 main roads, 29 branch roads, and many cutoffs and bypasses, maybe 12,000 miles of trail in total. Whatever the action, the Air Force aggressively used technology to take the fight to the enemy. The night observation site, the NOS, both the sensor and the operator of this device was known as the NOS. And this amplified whatever light existed on night missions, because most of these missions were at nighttime. This is forward-looking infrared radar. It was set in the aircraft's nose. It goes by the acronym FLIR. It could pick up warmth from the ground, which could be troops, could be a water buffalo. You know, at night, how do you know? Early electronic warfare, this fire control computer uses as the aircraft flying in one direction, the guns are pointing in another. So you needed a machine assist to make the gunfire accurate. This is a 1.5 million candle power light for finding enemy forces. Of course, it makes you easy to find the target for enemy ground forces. I read one account, you could read a newspaper on the ground if it's lit up from the sky with one of these lights. So it's pretty doggone bright. The 20-millimeter guns that were on board could fire 2,500 rounds per minute. The 7.62 millimeters guns could fire 6,000 rounds per minute in fast setting, 3,000 rounds per minute in slow setting, so an absolute tremendous amount of firepower. The pilots actually fired the guns, and aviation's weapons mechanics were generally known as the gunners, but that was their formal name, and they loaded and maintained the equipment. One mechanic, Everett Sprouse, recalled the noise. He wrote, "The gunship was shaking so hard you believed it would come apart at any second. The noise and smoke were so intense that it would take a couple hours after ignition to clear your brain. The gun barrels would turn red, then turn white from bullets being fired at such high rates." Reloading the 20 millimeters required using a drill-like device that weighed between 30 and 40 pounds, and you're not flying nice and smooth like Delta going down to Orlando. You're bucking and heaving all over the sky, so it is a workout. And this artwork gives you an idea of what it looked like. Flying the aircraft in attack mode was a constant challenge. It was a 3-man job between the pilot, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer, as well as input from the navigator. The pilot was generally the aircraft commander, flew rudder and ailerons. In the flying circle, he was constantly looking left with his eyes on the gun sight, and you're often at night, so there's no visible horizon. The co-pilot flew pitch, which controlled altitude, as the AC119 did not have independent altitude hold. The flight engineer worked the throttles and monitored the gauges, so it's a 3-man job, and there's no built-in seat for the flight engineer, so this guy's sitting on an empty ammo can. Vertigo and target fixation were serious dangers for pilots because they're just not a normal line, straight line of flight. So they had to deal with that. Communications were a constant problem. There were multiple frequencies used to communicate with other aircrafts and guys on the ground. There was an internal intercom system. And you're doing this over an loud, noisy airplane, 2 propeller engines at a minimum, some with 2 jet engines. The doors are open as you're firing the guns, and it's gunfire, and the thing would go half-deaf, never mind trying to talk to somebody on the radio.
And they're shooting at you.
Absolutely, that's got your attention. Anti-aircraft fire was always a risk, such as from the Russian-made SA-7. It's a lightweight, shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile. The IOs, the illuminator operators, and the gunners kept a lookout. If AAA was spotted, evasive action needed to be taken quickly, and gunners would need to hang on because you could expect sharp banking turns. So you're some risk if you're not strapped on, falling right out of the airplane. Gallows humor on board referred to field goals. Not like what you see in the lines on a Sunday afternoon, but enemy fire going between the tail booms and the horizontal stabilizer of your aircraft. Another risk that Don Smith advised me just a couple of weeks ago, planes were wide open, so if you followed somebody dropping Agent Orange, that stuff's coming right into your aircraft. Gives you an idea of some of the battle damage that might be incurred, and this was not it's not a lone example by any stretch of the imagination. Mechanics were unsung heroes. Long shifts, undermanned, absolutely necessary. There was a very high pace of combat operations with wear and tear on the airframe and engines, so a very long workday for the maintenance men. They often flew on the mission, serving as gunners and equipment operators. They often had to cut corners on safety because of the high mission tempo and a shortage of men. Crew Chief Jesse Lau wrote that because of time constraints, maintenance such as adjusting carburetors would occur with the engine running. So Lau might climb out of the cockpit, walk on top of the airplane, over the wing, and over the running engine to get to work in the carburetor. Easily could have been a disaster, he said, no doubt about it. He'd be court-martialed if he tried something like that stateside, but he had missions to fly and there were not enough guys, so you did what you had to do. I'd like to share some stories. Some are funny, some are tragic, all are thought-compelling. A few light notes first. Gunners might be referred to as puking cannon cockers because they often got airsick. One of the airmen named Bob Sofrino was on board an AC119 flying from the Philippines to Vietnam. The pilot had the co-pilot calculate the maximum takeoff weight to determine how much San Miguel beer could be flown on the return trip. And as you can see, they got the band here on the right, so it wasn't all work for our airmen. They had some time off. Navigator Frank Emma, we'll hear more about him in a few minutes, was assigned to brief units about AC-119s and was flown to a landing zone. After landing, the pilot noticed Emma got out of the aircraft without putting on his flak jacket. The pilot, just by way of passing note, you know, the last guy that did that without the flak jacket got himself killed by a sniper, right where you're standing. Frank Emma then thinks he set the world speed record for putting on a flak jacket after he got that piece of advice. Most of the time, though, laughs would be in short supply. 17 AC-119 crewmen were killed in action during the war. A Willow Run built AC-119 crashed at Townsend in April 1970. 6 died. There were 2 survivors. This is one of them, Major Robert Bokern, who was a navigator, and then there was Sergeant Alan Chandler, who was the illuminator operator. Bokern recalled takeoff was normal. They gain about 100 to 150 feet of altitude, and then the aircraft loses the right engine. These airframes are routinely overloaded on takeoff, so if you lose an engine, you are in a world of hurt. Bokern saw the pilot and engineer pushing everything forward in the left engine and then feathering the right engine. They crash land at night 2 miles past the airport. Later that night, Bokern called the squadron from the hospital. The phone was answered by the duty officer who was named Jose Cachuela. Cachuela thought he recognized Bokern's voice and immediately, very quietly said, "Who is this?" Bokern says who he is. Cachuela, in a strange voice, really stretching the words out, says, "Where are you?" Thinking, because he'd been told every plane exploded and everybody died, so he thought he was getting a call from either heaven or hell. Alan Chandler was the other surviving airman. He was seriously injured and burned with months of recuperation time. After he became ambulatory, but he's still recovering, he was assigned to assist others in the hospital. First person Chandler helped was an airman who was climbing down a rope to rescue somebody on the ground. The airman's helicopter was shot out of the sky, crashes on that guy, and he's now burned over 97% of his body. Chandler sat by his bed and talked to this man who never could respond, and he ultimately died. It was a life lesson for Alan Chandler because he recalled later in his memoir, which I have at home, is an excellent book, someone always has it worse than you. And no matter how limited your abilities, you can always do something to help someone else. One of the co-pilots was named Wayne Lessig, who I've spoken with as part of the research for this. He was a co-pilot, and he always knew the importance of teamwork, and that you absolutely had to depend on everybody in your team. He was part of a mission that found rockets being launched towards Da Nang, and Da Nang was known as Rocket City for its frequency of being attacked by rockets. So they see a rocket attack starting. Lasik calls the tower and warns of rockets, effing rockets, although I suspect in the ground message he spelled out effing a little more detailed than that. So the tower crew hits the warning siren, then hit the deck. First rocket hits the base of the tower and blows the windows, and the warning helped avoid casualties. Later, the tower crew made it clear Lessig saved their lives with his prompt action. They thus set up a beer account for Lasik at the NCO club, so he never had to buy a beer again in his name. The tab was named Rockets, effing Rockets. On a sadder note, and of course tragedy is never far away in the Vietnam War, Lasik recalled the loss of Captain Tom Hammond, I think it is, a pilot in a rocket attack. Hammond had been walking towards flight ops to prep for a mission, then he's mortally injured by a rocket. Years later, his daughter Kirsten was invited to an AC119 reunion. That's her on the right. She was cautious at first about attending, but she showed up, and it was a tremendous experience as she had never met her father. She talked with the attendees who knew her dad. They told her about his easygoing attitude, his sense of humor, his common sense, and how his natural leadership made him easy to follow and trust him. She's now a judge in Hawaii. I'm sure it was an emotional day for all concerned. A memorable flight occurred in May 1970. It was commanded by Captain Alan Milchek. Tail number was 8883. He and co-pilot Brent O'Brien flew their heavily damaged C-119 safely back to base. They were hit by AAA fire and then plunged into a steep dive. Milchek and O'Brien used all their strength to regain control of the aircraft. Navigator determines the bearings to return home. They were about 90 minutes from Udorn in Thailand, and they had a series of mountain ranges to cross, including one peak that was 9,300 feet high. Milchek orders the crew to throw everything out they could off board, just like you see in the old World War II movies, like 12 o'clock high with a bomber to toss the extra weight. That's exactly what these guys did. So they get back to Udorn. Milchek was heard on the intercom as the aircraft went onto the taxiway. "Thank you, Lord, thank you." And he was a religious man, and after leaving the military, he became a lay minister. After landing, they saw that over 14 feet of the leading edge and over 17 feet of the trailing edge of the right wing were gone, with damage to the right outboard aileron into a fuel tank at the end of the wing. The crew received the McKay Trophy, which is what the photo on the right, the most meritorious flight of 1970. Trophies began being awarded in 1912. Previous awardees include Chuck Yeager and General Henry H. Hap Arnold, so some pretty distinguished company for these guys. Daytime mission on May 12, 1972, over South Vietnam had a call sign of Stinger 41 that was flown by Captain Terrence Courtney. Courtney's aircraft was struck in the right wing by anti-aircraft fire. Both right wings began burning. Courtney used all his strength to maintain control. When he could no longer control the aircraft, he ordered his crew to bail out, and 7 men did get off. Courtney was posthumously awarded an Air Force Cross for sacrificing himself and allowing most of the crew to survive. He had been nominated for a Medal of Honor. Captain David Slagle and Staff Sergeant Kenneth Brown were killed in the incident and were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Memories of the 3 crewmen lost in the Stinger 41 remain strong. Websites such as the Vietnam Wall of Faces have moving tributes to those men and women lost in Vietnam, including Courtney, Slagle, and Brown. Terry Courtney was born in 1946. He's from Illinois, left behind his parents and 3 siblings. One remembrance said, "Terry and I trained together and spent our year in Vietnam together. His friendship will always be remembered, along with the extraordinary courage he demonstrated. He is a constant reminder of what great men do for one another during times of war." David Slagle was born in 1945. He was raised in Missouri. He was remembered as a real hero, officer, and gentleman, and crewmate. You and what you did for Stinger will never be forgotten. He was married, and the photo shows him and his wife, Barbara. At the time, they had a 2-year-old daughter. In the 2009 post, Barbara Slagle was looking for Dave's college friends so they could tell the grandkids what type of guy he was. Sergeant Brown was born in 1947. He's from Las Cruces, New Mexico. As the illuminator operator, that job typically meant you were also the jump master in a bailout situation. So the expectation was everybody else would get off the airplane before the pilot and the IO. Thus, you could reasonably say Ken Brown sacrificed his life for his crewmates. One friend wrote, "Ken Brown and I were classmates at La Cruces High School in 1965. Until recently, I knew nothing of Ken's sacrifice. Knowing that his efforts in the air made the enemy pay dearly for messing with our troops makes me feel very proud to have known him." Brown was married and he had 2 children. On a better note, the Hoa Khan Children's Hospital was opened in Da Nang in 1969. It was financed in part with contributions from U.S. service personnel, including AC119 airmen. The first year alone, 1,600 kids were admitted and 10,000 were treated on an outpatient basis. So from all the misery of the Vietnam War, some brightness and some good came out of it. As the U.S. pulled back, we worked on building up the South Vietnamese military. The Air Force crews trained their South Vietnamese counterparts to fly AC-119s. We then turned over all these aircraft to the Vietnamese Air Force. Our men came home, the aircraft did not, and none of these made it back to the U.S. And I think I'm right in saying that one of these, or parts of one of these, is in the Air Museum in Hanoi. Probably is in our visitor list.
There's one at Hurlburt too.
Yeah, I think from what I read, Don, that one wasn't in Vietnam.
Okay.
I don't think, but there is, you're right, there is one at Hurlburt. As you know, the Republic of Vietnam fell in April '75 to the communists. One story that one of the navigators was a guy named Bill Garrity, or Garrity, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. Long story short, he sponsored a Vietnamese navigator to become a U.S. citizen. That guy emigrated to the U.S. and became a Toyota employee for 28 years. And it was, he just skedaddled out of Vietnam when things collapsed and his future looked not very bright, but he really made something of himself here in the States. Life moved on, and some comments from AC-119 personnel on their experiences more than 30 years later. Erwin Greenberg remembered the camaraderie of the crews. Richard Hay dealt with PTSD for years. He and his crew bailed out over the South China Sea, and one man drowned, but they found inner peace years later, but it doesn't sound like it was an easy, straight-line path to internal peace. A man named Shelby Lucky said, I wouldn't do the tour again for $1 million, but the memories are worth more than $1 million. And reading that Shadows and Stingers book, two things come out consistently. One is you had 100% trust between the officers, the enlisted men, the crew up front, the gunners, because every man on board absolutely had to do their job, or your odds of coming back home in one piece weren't very good. And that the other crew that they knew were some of the greatest men they ever met in their lives. So it's just a unique experience, I guess, is the only way I could phrase it. Some perspective, Terry Sorrell, who's here tonight, was the AC-119 immediately preceding Stinger 41, and his aircraft had warned Captain Courtney's aircraft about the heavy and close anti-aircraft fire. After landing, Sorrell's crew learned that the Stinger 41 had been shot down, and how do you forget that? And you have to think, why wasn't I shot down? The guy behind me was. Luck? God? Take your pick. I mean, it's an unanswerable question. You just have to sort it through your own philosophy. And again, that Shadows and Stingers book, a number of these guys saying, I don't know. I made it home, my buddy did, go figure. And it's just not a question you can answer. This man is Sergeant John Rucker, who was a 21-year-old crew chief with the 18th SOS based in Da Nang. He was killed in a rocket attack 11 hours before the ceasefire went into effect on January 27, 1973. He was the last enlisted man killed during the Vietnam War. On John Rucker's page on the Vietnam Wall of Faces, there's a note from a man named Larry Addis. And Larry wrote, John and I traded shifts that day, or would have possibly been me being that last roll call. As the note, he felt years of guilt for doing absolutely nothing wrong. The commemoration was taken this January, 50 years after the anniversary of the war's conclusion, and unveiled a portrait of Sergeant Rucker and his friends and family. So in hindsight, what do these airmen and the ground crews and these aircraft accomplish? In one sense, you can say it's kind of like a calculus problem. You just add it up. It left a lot of casualties in the enemy. Destruction of war material, like you can see the tanks and bridges being destroyed in these photographs. Post-war analysis concluded AC-119s were extremely useful weapon systems. The crews overcame equipment limitations with skill and resourcefulness. South Vietnam lasted as long as it did, as the North never could get to full strength in the South until we left. American lives were saved, and here's a story of navigator Frank Emma. This was a guy who set the world speed record for putting on the flak jacket back at the landing zone. So he was on duty one afternoon, and this very large Army Green Beret comes in to the office. And he asked who flew Shadow 45 the previous night, supporting their unit. Turns out it was Frank Emma's crew. He immediately gave Emma a bear hug, And Emma Road said he thought he was going to have a couple of ribs broken, but this guy was as strong as an ox. Tearing up, though, the Green Beret gives Emma a note reading, Shadow 45, thanks for saving our lives. Without you guys, we all would have been killed. And it was signed by the 6th soldier who survived the firefight and been rescued by helicopter. Emma received many awards and decorations from his career. And he said none of them could even remotely touch that scene with a Green Beret. President Nixon announced the Paris Peace Accords on January 23, 1973. That led to our troops coming home, including those saved by the work of the AC119s. This obviously is the Vietnam Wall, and it's got over 58,000 American names on it. Some of the names are AC119 crewmen, but it's safe to say without their efforts, there would have been many more names on the wall. So that concludes my formal remarks, but what I'd like to do is ask the AC119 crew that are here to stand up and share whatever perspective that you want about your service and the AC119. Don.
Let's see, where do I begin? Originally, I went over with Spooky. I trained on Spooky, the AC-47. I went through all the training. I had survival training at Fairchild up at state of Washington. Then they sent us through the altitude chamber. I don't know why, because we never went above 13,000 feet. We were all open door. And from there, I went to Clark Air Base in the Philippines for jungle survival. Spent 2 weeks there. Then I got in the Trang, Vietnam, in August of '69 with Spooky. I flew on them for about almost 2 months at the Trang. Then they phased the AC-47 out. They were just bringing in the AC-119s. But there was 10 of us at the time with Spooky. They didn't have any place for us to go. They sent us to the minigun shop. So we spent 2 months, a month at the Trang and a month at Fan Rain. We all wrote our congressmen and senators because we went over to fly, be part of an air crew. January 70, the 119 program really took off, and I was with the 17th, the ones without the jet assist pods. And let me tell you, they don't fly good on one engine. The jet assist pods help, but I flew 6. Let's see, when did I? Got there in January of 1970. Left in August of '70. Sorry, it's tough for me to, Barry talked about Shuttle 78. I was there when that happened. I seen everything at the end of the runway going off. Flares, ammunition. I knew all the guys. I'm sorry. It was just tough. Anyway, Alan Chandler, I told Barry, I got to see him afterwards. Went over to Tonsanut at the hospital. He was severely burned. He was all bandaged. They were getting ready to fly him out to
Japan, I think.
no, it was a burn center somewhere in Texas.
Oh, San Antonio, probably.
Yeah.
Brooks.
So, and I did talk to the major, I
Bill
forgot.
Volker.
Yeah,
Bill Volker.
and he was explaining what happened. When they took off, Barry pretty much talked about it. They were trying to feather that bad engine. They got it feathered, but they were only 100 feet off the deck. And a 119 with one engine, and the landing gear was halfway starting to go up. So they had that to fight. And apparently, they overboosted the good engine, blew the jugs out of the good engine. And then it pancaked on the runway, or hit the runway, skidded, and then hit a ravine, and a 119 went like that. The front end, he's, what was it, Boker?
Volker.
He saw the pilot, co-pilot, and the engineer was fighting the controls, and they were trying to keep it airborne. But they were crushed instantly. And the two gunners and the IO Chandler were in the back. I said, what happened to the two gunners? I knew them real well. He said, 1 second, we were there all together on a jump seat. when that propeller, when they hit the ground, it was still spinning, the good one, came through the fuselage. 1 second they're there, next minute they're gone. Then it caught on fire.
Thank you for sharing the sad story. Bob, anything?
Howdy, Bob Tiplady. I was a captain on AC119. Today, 19 though. I was there from 1970, February to February of 71. The K is the one that has the jet assist. It has a 20 millimeter cannon, and our job primarily we're shooting trucks at night. Although our best rewarding missions were TICs, when you're helping friendly forces.
Troops in contact.
But at that time when I got in country, I was a new captain. I had flown tankers. A funny story, I was in Thailand flying tankers, refueling planes coming out of North Vietnam. And so they say, Tip lady, you got to go down to the intel shop and we should go coming back to Vietnam. So you go there and they give you a book of pictures of airplanes. Now pick your airplane you want to fly in Vietnam in another year. And I go through the book and I see the 119. I said, holy shit, that thing still flies? That's the last plane I want. And I put down 105s, F4s, and I get back to Michigan where I was with a SAC, 135, and my orders come down, there you're going to 119. I didn't know what it was. Oh my God. And it was, I've had a great life. I've had the best life a person can have. But the most rewarding experience was my Air Force career. Particularly the highlight is flying gunships, the people that you flew with. All at night, the way the system works, you have 3 navigators, most of whom used to be ROTC instructors until they got their orders. And they're all lieutenant colonels and majors. Da Nang and captains. The colonels on majors went to Thailand or they went to Phan Rang, but nobody came to Da Nang. In fact, Terry was telling me now, the last few years they started rotating people out of there. So you didn't have to spend a year in Da Nang. But it was a great experience and I was very fortunate to get out of there. I didn't think I would at times, but because you got shot at every night, thousands of rounds. You saw the circle of our fire. It didn't show the fire coming at you. We had 2 guys, one gunner, normally an IR operator, 10 men on the crew. And their job was to lay out in the strip stream looking out the back of the airplane on hot mic saying, break right, break left. Because while you're shooting, they're shooting at you. And so you had to get on the target, get your 20 on them. And it's a beautiful sight when you blow it up. Final interesting story was, so we're flying, we're shooting, and we had F4s at night flying over the top of us. In case one of the guns came up or SAM, they could go in and suppress that. So we're working a target, and the guns are coming up, and all of a sudden, there's a huge secondary. And the co-pilot says, we got him, must have hit an ammo sight or something, he's jumping up and down, and all of a sudden we hear, beep, beep, the F4 guy bailed out. That was his parachute. That was an F4 we saw. But he got out, we went and saw him at the hospital. But it was a great experience, and glad to be here.
Good. Thank you.
Great job, Barry.
Oh, thank you.
Nice, a lot of information there. But I'd like to, there's so many things I could say. I'm going to try to reinforce a couple things that Barry said. One was the crew coordination, crew communication. It was critical. You had 10 men on this crew. Everybody counted on everybody else to make it through a mission. I know a few years ago I went to the reunion, and our reunion in St. Louis, Missouri, and I got a picture with my co-pilot, and my pilot. And I told both of them then that if it wasn't for them, up front, handling that plane, there's no way I would have come back. And they said, both of them, at the same time, said, yeah, but it was a 10-man crew. Everybody depended on everybody else. With that being said, I was a gunner, 3 gunners on a K model Stinger. 1 gunner would be assigned to the left rear door as a scanner. The other 2 gunners would work the guns, keep them loaded, repair if needed. When you're in that door and you're hanging out into the slipstream, trying to get a 180-degree view underneath the belly, from the nose to the tail, you see gun flashes from the ground because you're flying at night. What you first notice is the gun flashes on the ground. And then the next thing you see is the tracers coming up at you, and then you have to decide whether it's going to be a threat to you or not. If it's a threat, you call a brake. Brake left, brake right, out of the way. With that being said, the pilot never questioned the scanner, ever. He had to trust him. There was never, ever, all the times that I scanned, there was never a, are you sure? How close is it? Can we miss it? No. Once you call the brake, and you're already in a 30-degree bank in a firing circle, you're already in a 30-degree, if you called a left-hand brake, he was putting it on 90 degrees over, no questions asked, and everybody better hang on. And if gunners were in the gun compartment working those guns, carrying a 100-pound can of ammo over from the rack to the gun, they were going down to the floor. Me calling the brake, it was like I had forewarning. I knew what was going to happen, so I could hang on. But never, ever did they ever question a scanner, whether it be the gunner in the left door or the IO in the right door. Once you called that brake, he had to trust you, and that's what you did. The second thing I'd like to reiterate is the reinforce, was the May 2nd, 1972 is a day that burned in my brain. It was the day the Stinger 41 got shot down. We've talked a lot here. As soon as it was gear up, and you're over the fence, you're going over the trail, everything was blackout. You're flying at night. No formation lights on the outside, no lights on the inside. All you're seeing is shadows. You're working into the dark. Whether you're working on a gun or whatever you're doing, everything is blackout. We were built for night missions. Airplane was painted black from below. We were at 3,500 feet to 5,000 feet in a firing circle. If you were in a daylight mission, you were sitting duck. On May 2 of 72, there was actually a TET of 72. Everybody knows about TET of 68, but there was a TET of 72 also. And I was flying out of Benoit. We were flying out of Benoit, and we were covering a little town called An Lac. Daylight. 24-hour coverage, trying to save this town from being overrun. I'm in the left-hand door, scanning, daylight mission, 3,500 feet, black airplane, blue sky, clear day, slow moving. The one thing that we had working for us at night was you could see the tracers coming up at you, and you could call the brake. In the daylight, I couldn't see the tracers. They blended into the day. And I got rounds going past the co-pilot, and he's yelling. He says, "Holy crap, it's going right by me." And I tell him, I can't call the brake. I can't call the brake if I don't see it. So we made it through that mission. We pulled off. We RTV'd. Stinger 41 comes on. By the time we're geared down, by the time we're on the ground, we heard the Stinger 41 got shot down. Today, I still don't know, for the grace of God, that we didn't get shot down. That gunner was good down there. They were awfully good. They were accurate. 37 millimeter, 23 millimeter. It was all around us. And it's like Barry said, why not me? I don't know. To this day, I don't know. But here I am. And I'm lucky because I was lucky to have a hard crew. I flew with the same guys 90% of the time. And I trusted, and we worked together. The other 9 guys and myself worked together, and we made it through.
Terry, question.
when you guys with the 18th, with the Stingers, with the G models, the pilot, most of the pilots that we flew with or I flew with, they didn't like using that illuminator. We used the flares because you could get a 9-level gunner down there, lock onto that light and shoot at you. So they didn't like using that illuminator if they didn't have to.
The year I was over there, we didn't use the illuminator ever.
Okay.
There were some missions that did. If you were flying perimeter defense, like around Da Nang,
Right.
trying to stop the rockets from coming in, they might light up an area for the ground people where they could see what was going on. But in my missions, I did 120 combat missions, never used the illuminator once. The flare launcher, which is on the right rear side of the aircraft, we did use. We used that in defense of the SAM-7, the Strela missile. If a scanner called a Strela missile firing, SAM firing, that IO was punching off those flares. A flare launcher would carry 24 flares, Mark 24 flares, 2 million candle power apiece. He'd just punch them out as fast as they could. Because that SAM-7 was a heat-seeking missile. Hopefully, that's what happened. So we did use the flare launcher in that case. Those are the only cases we used for either the illuminator or the flare launcher.
We also have an AC130 vet, Gary Anderjack, who's a volunteer here at the museum.
And you can hear me good. Well, I graduated from University of Michigan, ROTC, got my commission, went into pilot training in Randolph, and went to Gunships after that. Turned out to be a gunship pilot, AC-130 gunship. Some of my stuff is over there against the wall, as far as pictures of some of the targets that we got, some of the battle damage that I personally got. And thank goodness all the battle damage is in the airplane and not in my body. What I want to do here, just for a little bit of a dramatic thing, I often took a tape recorder along with me and sat in my seat and just put it in my headset. And I recorded one night, there have been several like this, but the only one I recorded, where I almost bought the farm. And that when we were working a truck convoy, and I was in the right seat at this one. We had a lot of senior aircraft commanders, and I was a junior, so I got the right seat all the time. I was working the fighters and the radios. And we had 3 F4s always with us, one on the tanker, one to or from the tanker, and one overhead to keep the guns down, as Terry was mentioning. That particular night, I can tell you, which is a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, the North Vietnamese, and I know, were waiting for us to do something stupid, so we did. And what happened was we were working this convoy, and a couple of guns were kept driving us off our targets, a couple of North Vietnamese guns. So we couldn't find them. We didn't duel with a gun on the ground. We didn't do that because his buddy would shoot you in the butt. But our fighter escort, Dick Nicholson, and his backseater was the Chicken Man. These guys, and Chicken Man played the piano. These 2 guys were Maverick and Goose before there was a Maverick and Goose. And what you're going to hear here is, at least I hope you will, I can play it again later on. We couldn't find this one gun that kept harassing us, and Nick couldn't see him either. And Nick decided to turn his lights on and roll in a basket, roll over in the top of us, and looking to see if he can draw some fire. I told you he was kind of a Maverick kind of guy. So he did, and that's what the North Vietnamese were waiting for, something stupid. So 3 guns opened up on us at one time. And we were right in the middle of it. Nick wasn't, but we were. I can remember 37 millimeter clips of 5. And 5 went by the nose on the left-hand side. I was sitting in the right seat, and 5 rounds went right by us. I swear, if we'd been 5 seconds early, I wouldn't be here talking tonight. So anyhow, you'll hear me clear Nick in, and Nick says, I'm in. And then you hear the scanners that we're talking about. You hear the scanners. That particular night, we had an extra scanner. He was in the right, with a hatch in the C-130 on the right-hand side. He was sitting there, and then we had the regular scanner, the IO, illuminator operator, who was hanging out of the ramp on a cable, looking underneath the airplane. Well, you'll hear both of those guys telling us in front what to do. Brake right, brake left, or whatever. I hope you can hear this when it happens. And what I said, I cleared Nick in, and he goes, I'm in. I said, Roger. And then I said something, and then he comes back out of that after all this gunfire, and he said, you get him. At that time, we were in a 90-degree bank. I was looking down at the ground, and I said, first thing came to mind is, are you kidding me? And that was the end of the tape. But let me just try to take.
Mike, if you mind.
Yeah, let me try this. I realize there's a lot of hearing aids in the room. I'm more than welcome. Dixie in.
Okay, then again now, watch.
My squadron, then kind of a sober note, my squadron lost 6 airplanes, 52 guys killed in action. 42 of them, if you've ever been to Honolulu, Punch Bowl Cemetery, it has the big monument for missing in action. 42 of those 52 guys' names are on that monument, and they're still somewhere. They're still missing in action. So that was our contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all for coming. They brought in a number of pictures and artifacts from their time during the service, so after we're done, if they don't mind sticking around for a few minutes, feel free to go on and take a look, but take any questions, sir.
I'd like to add a comment as Sergeant Kirsten from the 1st and 6th Infantry out of Da Nang in 1968. You left off a detail you should add. If you've ever seen the fire coming in on the ground at night for Spooky for us in 68, every 5th round, is that right?
Yes, every fifth.
It's a river of red.
There's 4 in between.
And being a man on the ground, on the radio, I was forward CP radio operator. I'm talking to the forward air controller who's talking to him, and I'm talking to my other companies because we want to make really sure he knows where we are. And the sergeants say, everybody, get down. You got a few guys who want to watch. About 3 seconds later, there were men underground because it's just a rip of fire. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I don't know if anybody can hear me or not, but one thing, can you hear me?
Yeah.
No. One thing we had to do before we could fire on a target, the pilot always was talking to whoever was on the ground, Army, Marines, ARVN. We can monitor everything on the airplane, the crew. If we had to talk to somebody on the crew, we had a little push button. You just push it and talk. But you could hear everything. The pilot was talking to the guys on the ground. And sometimes they'd be screaming. They had the Vietnamese or the VC in the wire all over the place. They said, hose it down, we're in the bunkers. And one thing I was going to bring up real quick was, before we could fire, because some VC got a hold of our radios, and some could speak fluent English. And they were calling coordinates in on their own people. So we had to take about a minute, get the coordinates, call 7th in Saigon, verify the coordinates before we could open up. Thank you very much. And I want to thank this guy for bringing the 119 program to light, because we're not that well known.
questions? Terry?
I just want to add on to with that tape that he just played. When you're calling AAA out of the door as a scanner, you're seeing the muzzle flashes and you're seeing it come up, and you're evaluating whether it's going to be a threat or not. So you're talking to the pilot, talking to the co-pilot, who says, AAA 9 o'clock, no sweat, AAA 7 o'clock, getting close. But afterwards all is said and done at one of the reunions, pilot and co-pilot told me they could tell what a threat it was by the octaves of my voice to go up. And that's basically what you heard on that tape, is those the octaves go up, believe me. It gets a little bit scary. And so they could tell. The octaves in my voice went up, they knew it was close.
How many rounds did they carry? How much ammunition was on the aircraft?
On the average, depending on what we were fragged for, whether we were flying over the trail, truck mission, or if we were flying a TIC mission, troops in contact, depending on, if we mixed the 20 millimeter, which is 7.62 millimeter, usually averaged around 20,000 rounds, 20 to 30,000 rounds, just depends. And if you put all 6 guns on the line, which we did every once in a while, it's about 29,000 rounds a minute that was going down to the ground. So, and inside, you couldn't hear yourself think. Your head would be rattling inside your helmet. Couldn't hear yourself think. I always called it controlled chaos. Is basically what it was. Smoke, noise, darkness, you name it, you had it.
You know, and Terry, you probably trained the pilots too, because they'd get, some of them, the newer ones, would get excited. Hey, give me 4 guns. I said, sir, if you fire out all 4, we got to reload them damn things. So we put 1 or 2 on. We controlled the switches in the back.
The only time we ever put 6 on was when we were depressing RTB. We had some targets to get rid of, but we were running out of fuel. Put on all 6 guns. Let's go home.
Right.
See what we got.
Wow.
Airplane is very accurate. As a pilot, you shoot a 2-second burst. The IR sensors, they can identify. You've seen the photos of cops watching people run around houses. That's what it was like. They can see a truck. And so if you can get and shoot and get your pipper on the target, you're going to hit it. You would never, ever hold your button down and shoot for more than a couple seconds, because it's so powerful and so accurate. And so, and those gunners, these are big canisters. They're cranking these 20s in. It's a very tough job back
And
there.
the batteries were only good for 2 loads. Then you had that little, on the miniguns, they had that little tiny hand crank you had to go by hand.
Yeah, that's a lot of work back there.
Right.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. Jeff, anything you want to?
One thing.
Oh, yes, sir.
Put it in perspective, I'm one of the last Vietnam vets, but for like that young man right there, the Tet Offensive of 72, there were more enemy troops, more armored vehicles than what the Germans did during the Battle of the Bulge. So our troops fought against odds that were greater than most of the time the guys fought in World War II, with no support back here.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for sharing your story. Barry, thank you for bringing it to light.
You weren't one of my students.
Wow. We get great programs like this every month, first Wednesday of every month. Next month, we're going to screw with your head because it's not going to be the first Wednesday because the day before is 4th of July. So we're going to do it on July 12th, 7:30. Robert Myers will tell the story of Augustus Herring, who in 1898, 5 years before the Wright brothers, flew at Kitty Hawk, flew a powered aircraft along the shores of Lake Michigan near St. Joseph, Michigan. Why is he not credited with the first power flight?
Didn't have a good press agent.
You don't want to miss the story. Be here next month. Please remember the donation boxes off to the side and out in the hallway are hungry. Your support truly does go a long way to bring these programs to you every month. Becca, again, thank you for bringing these programs to life. Thank you all for coming again tonight. And until July 12th, bye-bye and bye-bye. See ya.